ordinance. We were very much in a time crunch since the board was meeting the following day. And the amount of information we really had to discuss that evening, it really left us with no choice but to do it over one day. Yeah, I expect future meetings to be much more on time and much more to the agenda as far as the time limits go. No, that's definitely something I know everybody's concerned about with evening meetings and families and everything else that we have to do. Lorena, what were your thoughts on the subject matters and the discussions that we had?
I think it was great for us to be able to hear what the community's kind of thinking or expecting, or the kinds of concerns that they have. I do feel like maybe the topics that we had were kind of difficult. So it seemed like there were a lot of issues brought at one time to the attention of the council, and just a lot of things that would probably have led to a longer meeting. But otherwise, I feel like it's good to continue to have those types of meetings kind of spread out, so that way we can continue to have a relationship with the community and give them an opportunity to bring their issues forward, so that, you know, they have an opportunity to tell us what their concerns are, and we can kind of play mediator and help, you know, make connections with the sheriff's office and with them all at one time.
Yeah, and Dora, I see you there. How are you feeling about those last two meetings, specifically, you know, regarding the Evelyn Cheatham ordinance and the one before, where we were able to hear from a very large part of our community and several panelists? What were your thoughts on those last two more open discussion meetings?
Well, I thought those meetings were very important. A lot of powerful emotions were communicated, and it really reminded me why this work is important and why it's important to represent, because I also have a lot of those similar emotions that a lot of our community members have. So I did think there was a lot of I would say repetition of similar things that were being said, which didn't allow us to give more space for other people with different opinions or different viewpoints to express. So that was the only thing, the downside that I saw. But the topics were good. I really enjoyed hearing and thought it was amazing that we got so much feedback on the Evelyn Cheatham ordinance. And I think a lot of people were very, at least who I've heard from, were very appreciative that they were able to speak and able to voice their opinion on what they would want for us here in Sonoma County. But I do think that we should continue to do more meetings like this. Obviously not, I don't think back to back, because it does take a lot of time, and it kind of there needs to be a special place that we hold these meetings for our community as Ayolero.
Thanks, Dora. Yeah, you know, Dora, what you said at the end of your comments right there is kind of how I've been feeling with those two meetings. Is I felt that those meetings were extremely powerful and necessary. The first, of course, for our members of our community to express their frustration, their anger, their desperation at the system after very recent killings of George Floyd and all the other ones still fresh in everybody's mind. I think that that meeting was very important to allow people in our community to be able to express that to us, to the sheriff who was present at that meeting, be able to vent that frustration, and not just vent it, but vent it in a way where it's falling on listening ears who are actually going to try to do something about that. And I think it was very powerful for the members of our community to come forward and be heard. Regarding the Evelyn Cheatham discussion that we had last time, I don't think that without that discussion, I mean, the Evelyn Cheatham ordinance without our CAC discussion and without our communications with the Board of Supervisors, they may have taken some action with Evelyn Cheatham, but we would not have had those modifications, which after reviewing the annual report that we will get to are such important modifications that are needed as part of the ECO and as part of Measure P that is now on the ballot. With Evelyn Cheatham and the additional modifications that we were able to come up with as a CAC, I think that Measure P is extremely strong, extremely important for our voters to pass. And certainly thank you to the members of our community who worked so hard on drafting the original ordinance. And of course, to Carlene and the other people involved for working it and modifying it in such a way that it can be on the ballot. I think those two meetings were extremely valuable to the CAC and to myself, and certainly to our community. I have heard nothing but positive remarks from our community and from the politicians who were a part of those discussions, from everybody who really took part in it. It was a very positive thing. So as Dora was saying, I hope that we can create a space outside of the Zoom realm once we're able to, so that our community members can participate like that in person. Zoom is a great way for everybody to be able to have the access to participate. But I think as a CAC, when we are able to get going again without Zoom, our inreach into the community really needs to be stepped up, and we really need to be able to get people involved and get those same people who were outspoken on Zoom to come to these meetings and to continue to give us that information. I thought those two meetings were awesome, and I look forward to more like them. Okay.
Evan.
Yeah.
Can I add just one thing? I
Please.
just want to give a shout out to Lorena,
Yeah.
my partner in crime, for the restorative practice session. She was a pleasure to work with. Thanks, Lorena.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was great. And although we are not yet at a place where people are coming together for that restorative justice and that restorative practice, working towards that with a common goal to always be working towards the ability to seek that justice, to seek that that restorative plan for everybody, I think is very important. And for those who have continued to be harmed, from some justice to be found. Alma, can we go back to you real quick and get some update on the compliance CAC ad hoc before we continue on with the annual report?
Yes, let me see. I'm looking for my form. It was just right here. Oh, you know what? Okay. So the interns have finally completed all the research for all 58 counties. So right now is when we start looking at the research and starting to make our recommendations. So they finished the interns have finished their job. Now we're going to start looking at all the information and compiling it and coming up with recommendations. We also set our meeting times for the next few months, and we're going to start preparing the conversation or information on conversation on the body-worn cameras. And I think that's pretty much it. I think from now is when we're going to start. Now that the research has been done and the matrix has been done, now is going to be when we're going to start looking at it and starting to talk about some recommendations that we would like to make.
Thank you. Yeah, and our interns have been really great, really invaluable to all of the work that the CAC is doing. I know they've been working hard in the background, doing a lot of the research with the various counties in California, compiling that for us so that we can then sort through it all and make some recommendations. So thank you again to our interns. I'm now going to turn the meeting over to Carlene Navarro. She will give us an introduction to the annual report, that has been made available publicly. It was made available last week. It is available on the IOLERO website and was also sent out with the most recent newsletter. So I will go ahead and turn that over to Carlene to begin our annual report discussions.
Okay, thanks, Evan. So I'm going to share my screen so I could just give a brief intro so that the CAC can start their discussion of the annual report. So I want you guys to have as much time as you need to discuss the annual report. So like I said, this is just going to be a brief introduction to get us started on the conversation. So the annual report, which you all received a copy of, starts with pages 1 and 2 that include a table of contents and an executive summary. Section 1 discusses IOLERO's current ordinance, the legal challenges that have been faced by IOLERO, and the proposed changes to the ordinance. And section 2 covers IOLERO's lack of resources. Section 3 discusses IOLERO's 4 operational branches, which include the CAC, the audits, the community outreach, and proactive work like our community-oriented policing project. Section 4 is a detailed discussion of the complaints and the audits. And as you can see, the majority of the annual report is dedicated to this section, as it comprises 37 out of the 58 pages of the substantive part of the report. Section 5 is a closing section called Looking to the Future. There are also 3 appendices that include the photos and bios of our CAC members, a sample of the newsletters, and a sample brochure. One of the topics mentioned in the executive summary is the growth IOLERO has experienced in 2019 and 2020. In March 2019, when I first came into the office as director, the budget of the department was $562,000, and the office was comprised of 1 administrative assistant and 1 director who does all of the department head work and all of the attorney work, and that's discussed in more detail in that section. Compare the fiscal year budget for 2020-2021, which is now $1.391 million. And the office will soon include a director, 2 additional attorneys, a programs manager, and the administrative assistant. Pages 10 through 18 of the annual report discuss some of IOLERO's successes despite the many challenges the department has faced. These successes include IOLERO and the CAC's partnership with Sonoma State University, the internship program with Sonoma State University, the CAC's policy review in joint with Sonoma State University and the interns, which has been getting rave reviews from everyone who's participating, the bilingual e-newsletter, which goes out monthly and sometimes more often as necessary. IOLERO has gone from 450 subscribers on our email list in March of 2019 to currently about 7,500 subscribers. We have a social media campaign that we started in February of this year, redesigned brochures and website, brochures displayed in the jails and across the county departments. Expanded allegations are now reviewed by IOLERO from what was reviewed in the past, and new policies. Pages 19 and 20 of the annual report discuss the legal limitations for what information I can share with you about the audits. The law allows for a discussion of the auditor's critiques and evaluation of the administrative investigations, the manner in which the sheriff's office procedures and practices may have contributed to the basis for the complaint, and IOLERO's recommendation for institutional improvement. However, any information that is derived from or comes from the administrative investigation may not be shared with the public. When a complaint is investigated by Internal Affairs, the Sheriff's Office, there are 4 general findings that are usually made. Sustained means that the sheriff's office found a violation of its policies based on the evidence. Exonerated means that the sheriff's office found that there was no violation of policy. Inconclusive means there was not enough evidence to prove or disprove the complaint. And unfounded means the evidence does not support the complaint. I want to note here on this slide that Iolero actually received 24 completed investigations from the sheriff's office between June 2019 and July 2020, which was the cutoff date for the annual report. I used the January date in the annual report because the last annual report was given in December of 2018. However, I want to be clear that when I came into the office as director, the first investigation I received from the sheriff's office was actually in June of 2019. So this is an average of approximately 2 cases per month, and that includes critical incidents where a death occurred, for example, like in the David Ward case. So these are some summaries of the results of the audits. In 4 of the cases, the sheriff's office sustained the complaint, meaning a violation of policy was found. I agreed with 3 of those cases and found that in the 4th case, it was incomplete because an additional mental health employee's conduct should have been evaluated. And those cases can be found in the annual report on pages 24 through 40. In 5 of the cases, the sheriff's office found no violation of policy. I agreed in 3 of those cases and also made recommendations for policy going forward. I found that in 2 of the cases, they were incomplete because they required a review of additional employees, for example, dispatch and medical staff. And those cases are reviewed in pages 41 through 51 of the annual report. In 3 of the cases, the sheriff's office found that the complaint was unfounded. I agreed in 1 of those cases and disagreed in 2. And those cases are discussed on pages 52 through 55 of the annual report. So I'm going to just briefly discuss 3 of the audits. The first is the audit of the case involving David Ward, and he is the man who was killed in the Bloomfield area in November of 2019 during an arrest. I made 5 recommendations in that audit. Those were to adopt a de-escalation policy, like the sheriff's high-risk stop procedure, which was an issue in that case. And I recommended that they incorporate the high-risk stop procedure and other similar policies into their policy manual. The second recommendation was that the sheriff's office modify the vehicle pursuit policy, for example, when deputies should initiate and when deputies should terminate a vehicle pursuit. The third recommendation was that the sheriff's office should investigate conflicting information that came from dispatch in that case. The fourth recommendation was that the sheriff's office increase training in biased policing, which is also known as implicit bias, and crisis intervention. And the fifth recommendation was that the sheriff's office address training issues with the internal affairs investigators, for example, on issues such as leading questions during witness interviews. The David Ward case resulted in 2 new policies and 1 new investigation. The sheriff's office reports that they are going to implement a new overarching de-escalation policy that will apply to all the sheriff's office's policies and procedures. And that is in addition to the requirements of SB 230 and AB 392, which gave specifications for de-escalation in use of force areas of policy. So this would be overarching and applicable to all policies and procedures. The second new policy is increased training. So the sheriff's office is going to increase their training in implicit bias from the post recommended minimum, which is 2 hours every 5 years, to 4 times per year plus the minimum. They're going to increase crisis intervention training from 32 hours for the lifetime of a deputy, which is the minimum recommended by post, to 4 times per year plus the minimum. And POST, of course, is the Commission on Peace Officer Standards and Training, and they make recommendations on minimum standards of training. The third thing that came out of the David Ward audit was a new investigation of dispatch. And I talked with internal affairs investigators earlier this week, and that investigation is underway. The next audit I'm going to discuss briefly with you involved a case where there was an error made during reporting to Immigration and Customs Enforcement, aka ICE. The state of California provides guidelines for when the Sheriff's Office may provide information to ICE in a statute known as the California Values Act. And you can find a more detailed discussion of the California Values Act and how it works related to this policy on pages 24 and 25 of the annual report. And in this case, I made 8 recommendations in the audit. 1, to revise the training program that the Sheriff's Office uses. Specifically, that they provide a trainer and a guide for the employees who work at the jail who have to interpret this complicated statute known as the California Values Act. That the Sheriff's Office provide regular trainings for employees, for example, a biannual training related to their new guide on how to interpret the statute. That they implement a two-person system review, where every case is reviewed separately by 2 different employees before notifications are made to ICE. That they assign the duty of ICE notification to a specified team who receives regular training on this topic. So that would be a team of people who receive the regular training instead of whatever correctional deputy is on duty taking a look at each case and making a decision about reporting to ICE. That ICE not be notified until there's a conviction. That they authorize employees to run rap sheets for sex registrants to determine the underlying conviction, because there are some nuances that are important in that area. That they provide additional training and open-ended questions for the internal affairs investigators, and that they allow the auditor to sit in on the interviews of the witnesses. All of the recommendations were incorporated into a new immigration and notification policy, except for waiting until a conviction before notifying ICE. The Sheriff's Office won't be making that change. Their current policy is not to make a notification to ICE until there's been a preliminary hearing in the case. And second, to allow the auditor to sit in on internal affairs interviews. The next case that I'm going to discuss briefly involved a community member who was injured during an arrest. I made 2 recommendations in this case. The first was that the Sheriff's Office adopt a policy for deputies when they're transporting a verbally aggressive or combative arrestee in order to minimize injuries and the chance of injuries, because as you can imagine, if a deputy is bringing an arrestee into the jail or into the Sally Port, and the arrestee is being combative or extremely verbally aggressive and seems like he or she may become combative, that raises issues for the potential for the use of force and for injury. The second recommendation was that internal affairs investigators should not use email to interview witnesses. So in this case, you guys, the Sheriff's Office had a use of force policy that applied to situations where deputies are trying to effect an arrest of a person and the person is resisting, for example. So it applies to the time period when the deputies are trying to make the arrest. The Sheriff's Office also had a policy that governed transportation of inmates, somebody in the jail from jail to court or from jail to a doctor's appointment. However, there was no policy that applied to the time period when a person has already been arrested but not yet booked at the jail, because you don't become an inmate until you're booked at the jail. So there was a gap in policy and in the policy manual for how to treat a situation where an arrestee is being taken from the scene of their arrest into the jail. And that's the time period that this new policy covers. The Sheriff's Office adopted a transportation of arrestees policy. The policy applies when a deputy is bringing an aggressive or combative arrestee from the scene of an arrest to the jail. It's a preventative policy that allows for the deputy to wait for the assistance of jail staff, which may include mental health staff, medical staff, additional deputies and a video recorder in addition to body-worn camera videos prior to removing the arrestee from the vehicle. And one of the things that we discussed when this policy was being implemented was that sometimes on a very basic level, when an arrestee is exhibiting aggression towards the deputy who arrested him, it helps just to switch out the faces and the players involved in that transportation. So in addition to the mental health staff and medical staff, bringing in a different deputy who didn't actually make the arrest can be helpful sometimes to de-escalate the situation. The last thing I'm going to mention in this introduction were the trends that were found, and then we can discuss the report and I can answer any questions that you might have had about it. There were 4 trends that occurred throughout the audits. The first one involved witness interview issues. There were a lot of cases where there were leading questions involved throughout the administrative interviews. And as I discussed in the annual report, a leading question is a question that suggests an answer, right? So if you say to somebody, the sky is blue, correct? You're suggesting the answer to your own question. If you say, what color is the sky? The person answering the question might say, the sky is blue, but he also might say, well, it was sunset and the sky was pink and gold color. So it's important for interviewers not to suggest an answer when they're asking a question, because it makes it seem as if the interviewer wants to get a certain result, right? Or hinder the person answering questions in a certain way. The second trend was incomplete investigations. 2 of these cases involved errors by jail mental health staff and medical staff, where an inmate was placed in general population instead of the mental health unit or the medical unit, which in one case resulted in the use of force, and in another case resulted in a mental health inmate being in general population and not getting the care he needed when he may have been suicidal. The third case involved the harassment and intimidation of an inmate, where I felt that the investigation was not complete because the inmate himself was not interviewed, in addition to another deputy who I felt should have been interviewed. The third trend was de-escalation arising in the audits. Of course, the most significant de-escalation issues arose in the David Ward case, which is discussed in detail on pages 31 through 40 of the annual report. And the fourth trend was dispatch issues. In 2 of the cases, there were issues with dispatch providing inaccurate or incomplete information to the deputies, which, as you can imagine, when a deputy is going into a situation, what he hears from dispatch is what forms his state of mind and how he's going to approach and treat that situation. Both of these cases resulted in the use of force. And so I think it's a really important issue to look at to make sure that dispatch is receiving proper training and painting a full and clear picture of what the situation the deputy is going into, and not focusing, for example, on violence versus, say, a person having a mental health crisis where something potentially violent may have happened, for example. So that's all I wanted to give for an introduction, and I look forward to hear what you thought and any questions that you may have about the annual report.
Thank you very much, Carlene. What I was hoping we could do as a CAC, since we've all received the annual report and of course the brief summary, and we've had a chance to look at everything, is I wanted to go around to our CAC members and ask each of you, based on your reading of the report, what you saw that surprised you, that you were wowed by, if you will, and what, after reading it, do you still have questions about? What are you still wondering? And so I wanted to get that from each of you and just open up a really good discussion among the CAC about this report and what we've learned about the 2019 to 2020 fiscal report. Let's start, if we can. Dora, are you available? Dora, are you there? Oh, great.
Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. So Dora, if you could tell us, some things about the annual report that you were impressed by, surprised by, just wanted to get your thoughts on it and start a good discussion.
Yeah. So I was really impressed about the organization of the annual report. I thought it was well put together, easy to follow, easy to read. It did take a while to read through all of it, but which I also think was good. Um, but a couple of things that surprised me was learning more about how the immigration policy and how that is done. And what Carlene was just saying about the recommendation of not calling in ICE until a conviction. So I thought that was surprising to me that the Sheriff's Department didn't go with that recommendation. And I also, what surprised me was the mental health employees, how that's outsourced by the sheriffs, and how they can't implement any, if something goes wrong, they can't really do anything because they're not their employees. So that to me does not, I feel like there should be some sort of, if depending on maybe like their contract or when it times out again, like make sure there's, if the sheriff would consider to make sure there's a clause or some sort of provision where they can enforce some sort of regulation of these employees to make sure that they're doing their job correctly. But other than that, those are the things that popped into my head. I was trying to search my notes right now when you called on me.
Thanks, Dora. Yeah, I was, when I read that, with the jail, the third party mental health services, I think also, yeah, I think it's very important that the sheriff's employees and the mental health providers, which is a different company, I think it's very important that they're on the same page, that they all know the same policies, and that the inmates at the county jail who are receiving mental health treatment and care are doing so in a way that is to their, it protects them rather than harms them. And I don't think the sheriff should be able to simply say, oh, well, that's the third party mental health provider. We have nothing to do with it. When they are in the jail and as part of the jail services, I do think that there needs to be some oversight with the sheriff's department as well. I agreed with that. Alma, what were some of the things that you saw and were surprised about or impressed by with this report, or concerned with, of course?
One of my concerns is also the mental health. I really don't think it should be something that should be contracted out. I think it should be the county and it should be the sheriff's office, because I think there's a lot more accountability that way. That's been my opinion since they did it, that it should be something that should not be contracted out. It should be something that they should be sheriff's employees. And I know, I think it has to do with budget or something like that, but I think overall it would be better if the sheriff's office didn't contract out, or the county didn't contract that out, because then we are left with the question, oh, well, that's their policy, or we don't get the full, we're not on the same page.
Yeah. Alma, would you want, now, obviously one of the issues that we hear a lot right now are how we don't want police or sheriffs dealing with calls for service with mentally ill individuals. We want social workers and things to be done that way. Are you suggesting in the jail that the sheriff's employees who are dealing
okay, so a long time ago, we did have employees that were from the county employees that actually worked at the jail. So part of our own county mental health staff worked at the jail. And so
just county mental
health. No.
No,
I know that there is a high percentage of inmates that need mental health services.
Oh, yeah.
A huge percent. And I think it should be something that is not contracted out, because then things like this happen. We're not all on the same page. We're not all following the same guidelines, the same policies.
Mm-hmm.
No, but definitely, yeah, there should be professional mental health staff there that is employed by the county or by the sheriff's office.
Such that they're subject to the same policies. And
Exactly. Exactly.
things like that.
Yeah.
Was there anything besides the mental health aspect with the jail of the annual report that?
Yes. Also, dispatch. That's something that we haven't looked at, and I'm glad Carlene looked at the dispatch, because I think that has that also has a lot of importance, and also everything, all the recommendations as far as like the training bias, the implicit training bias. I think that should also be given to not just deputies or correctional officers, but also dispatch and everyone that works in the sheriff's office, whether they're a detention assistant or a support service. I think it's a detention support service. I know their title changed. They used to be legal processors, and also dispatch. I think that those trainings should be for everyone.
Thank you. I'm going to throw my 2 cents in here and there between every, because you're touching on subjects that I thought about as well. I think, Carlene, the recommendation for the sheriff to investigate dispatch is probably one of the most important recommendations that I read in the annual report, Alma.
Mm-hmm.
The dispatch is the first person that somebody talks to when they call 911. And the information that's taken from that person and conveyed to the deputies, if it's not accurate, it can take a mental health call for help and turn it into a very different situation when the sheriff's deputies arrive. And I think we've seen that in a couple cases recently where somebody is calling for help or mental health counseling help, guidance. And the information that the deputies receive is very different than what was actually said to that dispatcher. I think that miscommunication can be fatal. And I think that recommendation is huge. And the fact that the sheriffs agreed to look into that and to open an investigation on having dispatch be the most accurate as possible, I think in the future will absolutely save lives. I think that was a remarkable recommendation to make, and I was very happy to see the sheriff picking that up and looking more into that situation.
Well, and Evan, can I just touch on that too, to piggyback on that? One of the things that, when you're a service provider and like these mental health and different things, one of the things that we talk about, like when you even case note, right? How do you, when someone's angry, well, is your angry my angry? Really, you need to unpack that angry, right? What is it? So I think also like knowing that people can describe things and be super dramatic, or we've have instances where people are not being truthful when they make 911 calls, right? That can happen too, where people exaggerate situations, the whole kind of Karen image thing. But I think also just being able to really know how to unpack those calls, because how people can also describe things and talk about things, especially if you're upset or you're, something's going on, I think is really important too. So back to that very beginning of that call, when you were trying to ascertain what's going on, knowing what those critical questions are to ask and how to ask them can also be really critical to have good information, as you're saying. So.
No, for sure. And with the dispatch, our dispatchers for the county and the police and fire, they're awesome. They do a fantastic job. They're given a lot of information at one time, and they have to get it out to the deputies who are responding quickly to a situation that is ever changing very rapidly. And that's why it's so important that information is accurate. And I think with both the verbal communications through dispatch, the computer communications that the officers can receive in their vehicles, even to the point of sometimes even hearing the 911 call itself. I think that improving that first communication to the deputies is a great step.
We talked about a lot of trainings that we wish we could have had. And, of course, COVID, we haven't been able to have any of our trainings. Right. But like, for example, in LSR, we do go sit by and do the 911 calls. And it's a game changer. Once you actually sit and hear those calls come in And like you say, it's a lot of information or minimal information that you're working with. So once again, we're in this situation where a lot of those trainings and things that we thought we were going to be able to do as a CAC, we haven't been, but if ever, that might be a good opportunity.
And the dispatcher job is a very unique job. Like you said, they are the first contact most of the time. They've also got multiple things, you know, if you sit there and you look at their screens, it is a hard job. It is a hard job to be a dispatcher. Not only do you have to take care of your deputies that are, you know, you have to know where they're at. You have to check in to make sure that they're okay. You have to take the calls, and then, you know, trying to weed out through the information as to, what is being truthful, what is not being truthful. Is this an emergency? Is it, do I need medical? Do I just need police? And there's a lot of questions. So it is a difficult job and in a hard job. And I think just added training would be good.
Yeah, and then training and just, just having the investigation being looked into of how can we improve that communication so that it's accurate, because with all of the stress and all of the, Lorez was right. Sometimes it's a ton of information. Sometimes it's nothing. And the dispatcher is really fishing for, what help do you need? I'm trying to get people out there. The accuracy is what's the important part. And I think it's great, a great recommendation, and it's great that our sheriff picked it up. Jose, what are your thoughts either on that issue or on another subject, or just anything in the annual report that you were wowed by or still left wondering?
Well, I got a small list here.
Yeah, great.
Things. First of all, I was extremely impressed about the whole report itself. I thought it was very professional, very well done. So thank you for that, Carlene, and your staff. The other thing, I was very impressed by the growth of 147%. That was quite impressive. And that's pre-measure P. So I'm assuming, there's more to come if that passes. I was actually also a little tidbit that I saw is, Iolero's been open since 2016, and most of the complaints and most of the things are coming to Iolero versus the Sheriff's Department. When you see how I think it was out of 16, 13 went to Iolero and the rest went to. So I think that itself, I think, speaks volumes on, probably the distrust. It's I'm not going to give it to the sheriffs because it might go nowhere or it might get lost in red tape. So that's why one of the important reasons this department exists. So so that was nice to see that. I did, obviously the recommendations that weren't taken, which I thought were valid recommendations, both on the ICE one and on the David Ward's one. So I guess this is a question to Carlene. What happens if you're really, really set on the recommendation and it's not adopted? At what point do you just drop it? Or is it just by case situation? Or is it, do you revisit it? Maybe like the chokehold or things like that. And then I guess another one, yes, you guys touched upon the dispatch, and I was wondering if the implicit bias training was also going to be for dispatch, because, when somebody speaks Spanish or when you see someone is from the Roseland district or somebody, does that automatically imply, to the dispatchers or certain things? I do agree, and I echo what Alma Roman said about dispatchers having a very tough job. They have so many screens, it would probably give me a headache just to sit there for an hour with so many things that they need to monitor. So I do appreciate them, because obviously we are looking at a small percentage because they do, the majority of the job is well taken care of. But that was it. Those were my main takeaways. Well,
thanks. I think it's very interesting as well that a lot of the complaints are going through Iolero, which is great. It shows that our community, number one, is learning more about Iolero to be able to know where to complain. As a criminal defense attorney, when I've spoken with clients, you can imagine the look on their face when they ask, hey, I want to complain to the sheriff. Who do I do that to? And before I would say, well, you have to do that to the sheriff. You can see that people are not very willing to do that. And before Iolero was able to take those complaints, there were a lot of complaints that were just never made because people didn't want to complain to the sheriff about the sheriff. They didn't think it would be taken seriously. They didn't think that it would be, essentially they felt it would fall on deaf ears. So now that people know Iolero is here for these complaints, I think it's excellent. And the community is definitely finding out more about it from the newsletter, which a remarkable number of people, 7,500 people subscribe now, both in English and Spanish. And those subscribers share. So when it's 7,500, we know it's going out to others. So the actual number of people seeing it is more. Yeah, it's great that so many complaints are coming in to Iolero versus straight to the sheriff. One thing I noticed in the report on that subject is that the sheriff is now going to have a new system of complaints where Iolero receives a monthly report on all of the complaints the sheriff received. That's very important because one of the things that I was left wondering or also wowed by was that the sheriff didn't need to tell Iolero when they got a complaint if it only went through the sheriff. And when we're talking about transparency regarding the complaints that are made and transparency for oversight, that's not it. And so I think it is a big step for the sheriff to now say, here's our monthly report of all complaints received. That way Iolero can compare and say, okay, well, we didn't get this one. This one, we have no idea about. And it helps to make sure that that level of transparency is there. So there's no question about it. So I think that's great, Jose. Lorena, what were some thoughts you had on the annual reports, either from what one of our other CAC members said or just your own, wows and wonders about the report?
I agree with all of the points that have been, sorry, Carlene.
Oh, sorry, Carlene.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to interject for just a minute because Jose had a question for me. So I just wanted to say, Jose, after I make the audits, I have conversations with sheriff's management. That sometimes, the last time we sat down and talked about audits, it was like 3.5-hour conversation. So we talk about the recommendation, we talk about why I'm making it, we talk about any research that I've done in support of the recommendation. If that doesn't work, I will revisit the issue through future audits if it comes up again, or through additional research that I find or trainings. And the third thing, and where I really wanted to interject with this, was that if something comes up and then a recommendation wasn't accepted by the sheriff's office at this time, that's an important thing for the CAC to look out for, because that could be a subject of a future ad hoc, or if they, decline to adopt a new policy for vehicle pursuits, maybe that's something the compliance ad hoc committee wants to take a look at, and how that fits into the use of force and what other agencies are doing, how they handle that. So keep your eye out, in the annual report for recommendations that weren't accepted. And so that you can connect it to your CAC work, because, the more evidence-based, research we can attach to these recommendations and cite to, I think the more helpful it is for the sheriff's office to understand why we want these changes and why they're important. And a lot of times, I come to them with, some research and we talk about it, and, I come back a second time and the answer the second time is, oh, that's a good point. Let's talk more about that. So, you can never have enough evidence to support the recommendations. And so if there's something you guys want to look into, and tackle next, please let me know and we'll set that up. So go ahead, Lorena, sorry.
Sorry, Carlene. Yeah, thank you.
That's okay. So I thought this was a really great report, and it was really well written. I like how it was organized. And I like how there are things that are explained in more detail. I haven't looked at the report that was written from the previous director, but I think it's really important on the things that about the sheriff's office, how, we can't order the sheriff to do something. Your job's only basically to provide recommendations, and like the limitations between what your job is and what they have to do on their end as the sheriff's department overall. I also like how everything was broken down and how you explained the the sheriff's response to your findings and or to your recommendations and things like that. And I did have one question about one of the complaints on page 50, where you mentioned something about recommending cases for mediation, and how you stated the sheriff didn't want to, or I guess the policy or process that was recommended isn't something that would work for Sonoma County, not necessarily stating that the sheriff said no, but it made me wonder what exactly is the process of mediation, and how does the sheriff, I guess, determine what gets mediated, and what might be some things that could be recommended to change whatever process is currently established to deal with that, and how does that get paid for? Because the way I thought of it, not knowing a lot about that process, is that you have like an intervening party, or like almost like a public defender when you're in court, and someone that gets assigned to help you. And how does that get paid for and all of that? And then, so Carlene, if you have an answer to that for now.
Carly?
In this case was that I made a recommendation for mediation, and the sheriff's office didn't feel that this particular case was the right case for mediation, because the parties involved here are
Complicated.
very complicated frequent flyers, and it just didn't seem like the right fit. And after we talked about it, I agree that this probably wasn't the right case to start with. The issue about mediation itself, the sheriff's office was concerned because what other agencies do, for example, San Francisco, is they handle the mediation program, and the cases are referred to mediation and then not considered complaints. So the sheriff's office wouldn't even review those cases necessarily. That's not a system the sheriff's office is interested in embarking upon. What I currently have in place is a mediator who's willing, one mediator, possibly two, who are willing to offer pro bono mediation services. So what I have to do with the sheriff's office is just continue to recommend cases for mediation. We'll do it on a case-by-case basis, and then we'll work with these mediators who are offering their services, if the sheriff's office agrees to that, and see how that works and go from there. And so what I envision for this type of program is that if it works in a few test cases, then we could open up maybe a larger pro bono program where mediators may want to contribute their services, in 1 to 2 mediation cases per month or something of that nature. But we just need to get a few good test cases so that we can work out a protocol.
Thanks, Carlene.
And then, sorry, Evan.
Oh, that's okay.
The thing I had a question on was, you noted that it's a trend for the leading questions that you mentioned during the witness interviews. So how exactly is that process conducted? Like, is it certain deputies who are assigned to conduct the interviews, or is it the arresting officers who are involved? And if it's not the arresting officers and it's certain people whose job it is to conduct those interviews, is there a way that maybe we could assist with providing, or maybe you can, recommendations as to how to ask the proper questions so that it doesn't turn out, your analysis in the end doesn't turn out, or doesn't determine that there were issues with how the interviews were conducted, and then shown that as a fault of the sheriff's office?
So the interviews, the administrative interviews, are conducted by the Internal Affairs Unit at the sheriff's office, and they have, I think it's 4 investigators. Is that right, Brandon? Currently 2 right now. Okay, so they're down to 2. I think at some point there were more. They're down to 2 internal affairs investigators. So it's an investigators who are specifically assigned to investigating complaints or administrative reviews. Cases sometimes go to, there's a grievance unit in the jail, and they had 2. Is that still the case, Brandon? They've still got 2 investigators over there who handle a large influx of grievances at the jail. They sometimes also take complaints and investigate those if they occurred in the jail. And then if cases in the substations of Windsor, the River area, or Sonoma, if there's complaints there, sometimes those are farmed out to, the chief in that area or someone else to investigate. So it's a designated group of people who do the investigations for the most part, these administrative investigations, and they've all received training in conducting investigations. What I've been told based on the audits is that this issue has been readdressed with all investigators. And so it's something that I'll be, continuing to look at going forward with the audits and see if there are any improvements.
Thank you, Carlene.
Thank you. Otherwise, I think you did a fantastic job. And I think the community will appreciate how this report was written.
Thanks, Lorena. I just wanted to add a few comments, and then we'll go ahead and open it up to public comment as well. Yeah, a few things that wowed me. I was very happy to see that the sheriff
For the record, Evan, I never got to give my 5 cents.
Oh, I'm sorry, Lorez. I apologize. Lorez, please go ahead.
You could go ahead and finish. I just didn't want you to move on to the next agenda.
Lorez, please go ahead. I apologize. I know you spoke when somebody else. I apologize. Go ahead.
No worries. So everyone has said a lot of great things, so I won't piggyback on that. Just want to say that, Carlene, I looked at the last 2-year annual reports and this year, so you really have accomplished a lot. And one of the things I wanted to say is, did I see in your report that a lot of this stuff had not been translated into Spanish prior to you getting translated in Spanish? Because I would think that's really interesting that this really grew out of Andy Lopez, which is predominantly Latino Hispanic community, and that this ILRO has been functioning this long and things are just now getting translated into Spanish, if that's what I read correctly. So I find that kind of fascinating, seeing as, that, were you going to say something, Carlene?
Are you talking about the annual reports?
No, you talked about how the, something, I think it's your newsletters and things have been going out, but they're going out in Spanish translation, which I thought was something that you had started when you started changing the newsletter and bringing it.
So the newsletter was new. I started that in December 2019 because there was a need to get information about the work of the office out to the broader community. And it's been really helpful in terms of providing people with information and transparency. And so that was started in December 19. And I believe we've always translated it into Spanish. There was an issue with the website, which is more of a county issue than an ILRO issue, because the website is in English. So what we did was we talked to ISD and had the Google Translator added to our website and moved that up on the page so that it's more visible and easy to use. And so you can use that to translate any content on the website, including PDFs, into Spanish or 90 other languages.
Okay, good. That's good to know. What I wanted to ask you is, looking at the last 2 reports and your report, obviously the relationship with ILRO and the directors of ILRO and the CAC have ebbed and flowed over the years and been different. How would you classify the relationship between you and the sheriff and the sheriff's department? I would say in this last time, but also with the recent event of protests and a lot more pressure coming from law enforcement, has that also affected the relationship?
We've always had a very professional working relationship. I think, Sheriff Essick and I were both new to this position when we came into it. I was appointed in March 2019, and he had just started in January 2019. And so from the beginning, we both worked on investing a lot of effort into relationship building between ILRO and the sheriff's office and trying to work together collaboratively. And I think that putting a lot of that effort in early on up front has helped, because things have gotten more challenging over time, with the political environment and the protests and increased scrutiny and the ballot measure. And so obviously things have gotten more challenging. It's a stressful time for everybody involved in this work. But I think that the work and the effort that we put into it at the beginning really helped, keep it professional through the more difficult times.
Thank you, Evan.
Oh, thank you, Lorez. And again, I apologize for skipping that, Lorez. A few comments that I wanted to make actually first is I wanted to ask our interns. I know you are there online with us. You've had a chance to look at these reports and you've been doing research. Do any of the interns have any comments on the annual report or anything that you may have saw in that report that kind of raised your eyebrows and made you wonder about something, or something that was really impressive or disturbing to you, and really anything that you saw in the report that you'd like to talk about? Any of our interns want to talk?
Yeah, first off, I want to say that the report was really well organized, like a lot of you have brought up. Had no trouble finding anything. And I really like that the recommendations for increased training, when we're able to do that, were taken, because I think that everything starts with the training. And I think everything else has pretty much been said that I liked or had concerns about.
Thanks, Abby. Any of our other interns? Okay, so just a few of my comments. The budget increase, I think it's almost shameful how limited the IOLERO budget was up until this year. And even where it's at right now, it's hopefully going to get all the audits done. The amount of audits coming in and the resources that are needed to go over those, especially with all of the critical incidents. I am so happy that our Board of Supervisors gave Carlene and the department more money, more staff. It is absolutely necessary. Looking at the comparison between last year's budget and this year's budget, I'm amazed that Director Navarro was able to do as much as she did with so little. And I have big hopes that with the increase of funds and increase of staff, that a lot of great work is going to be done this year. The outreach that we are doing right now, I think, is fantastic. And I think it's important to make sure that once we're off Zoom and back in real life meetings, that we figure out a way to maintain that outreach and the inreach to local communities, and that we get the same participation that we've received in the past 2 weeks and past 2 months and now from our community, because outreach for IOLERO is huge. Jose, when you were talking about people making more complaints to IOLERO, it's because of the outreach, it's because of the newsletter, because of people learning more about IOLERO. And I think that work is an extremely important aspect of the CAC and of IOLERO. The recommendations that the sheriff has agreed to look at, I think, is a big step in the right direction, specifically the overreaching de-escalation policy. I know Sergeant Cutting participated in the ad hoc meetings. Our ad hoc compliance de-escalation group is looking at that as well. I think it is a great thing for the sheriff's policy to have an overreaching de-escalation policy as part of its policies. Very, very important for everything that we've been learning with these traffic stops, whether it's a high-risk felony stop or just a basic traffic stop that goes bad. I think de-escalation is extremely important. The arrestee policy with transporting arrestees from the time of arrest to the jail, that loophole that has been closed, or at least is working on being closed, is huge. We can't say, or the sheriff can't say, that somebody violated policy if there is no policy. And that period of time between arrest and booking, there's a lot that happens in that time period. from the transportation in the vehicle and things that can happen within a police car to loading a arrestee in and taking them out. Lots can happen between the time they leave the incident and get to the jail. And I'm glad there's now a policy that's taking care of that. And of course, the dispatch policy, well, the investigation into that to perhaps renew that policy is huge. Accurate information to the deputies will save lives, and I think that's very important. Let's see what else I have. I think it is, I think it's outrageous that when a deputy is served notice of termination, that during the period where they are being terminated, they can retire and collect all their pensions and benefits and everything else that comes along with retirement. I would hope that, and I know this probably goes beyond the sheriff to their unions as well. I would hope that people take a serious look at the policy of allowing a deputy who is being terminated for cause to resign or retire with all of the accolades that retirement gives them during the time where they are being investigated and terminated. I know that with attorneys, with the state bar, attorneys used to be able to do that too. If we were being investigated for wrongdoing and we were being disbarred, we could resign during that investigation. And we would be able to resign our bar cards and wouldn't have to be, suspended or disbarred. We can't do that anymore. They changed that policy. And I think it's important for the police to change that policy too. The unions need to take this step. And from my, the way I look at things and the way we see sheriff's policies, yes, the union is there to protect the sheriff's deputies, but there is no justification for protecting bad sheriff's deputies who violate policy, who violate the law, and who kill innocent community members, or those who may not be so innocent. For those officers, there needs to be something that tells them, you cannot retire, you don't get that pension, we are going to fire you. And I think that's something that is probably not going to start with Iolero, but I think hopefully, that's when reading the Deputy Blount's and the David Ward, that's something that was just so offensive, and looking at that and saying, how can this man take a life, this deputy take a life, be terminated and fired for violating the policies specifically there to protect these lives, and be able to retire during that process. Overall, those were my wows and wonders from the report. I think overall the report shows that Iolero is getting stronger, which is necessary. The lack of resources Carlene had, again, it was shameful, and I'm glad that you're now getting more budget and more staff to do the work that we're doing. I look forward with our CAC to going through this report further and seeing what information we can take from the report, and with our interns' work that they're doing, what we can do to make further recommendations to the sheriff. I am glad that the sheriff is still listening. And, we read about lockouts in Sacramento and LA when they simply don't want to work with oversight anymore. I'm glad our sheriff isn't there. I'm glad they are still listening to our recommendations, although they're not accepting all of them. We didn't expect them to. But as long as the sheriff's department is still listening, we can continue to make recommendations and work collaboratively and make some positive changes for Sonoma County and our community. If anybody has any final comments, I'm happy to take them. Otherwise, I'm going to open up to public comment very shortly. Anybody?
I just want to say that I think this shows that Iolero and the sheriff's office are both doing their part to strengthen the relationship between the community and law enforcement. And just reading about the complaints, the analysis, the recommendations, and what's accepted and what isn't. And like you just said, Evan, not everything's going to be accepted, but at least there are more opportunities for recommendations to be provided in the future, and maybe like we read in the report, maybe a specific case isn't the right one to use to implement a policy or accept a recommendation from Carlene, from the sheriff, but at least it shows that there is open dialogue, and, you know, ILRO is doing its part to analyze the complaints and review everything that gets submitted, and the sheriff's doing its part to listen and trying to, you know, make changes. And we all know, like, change takes time. So this might not be something that the community will see as like a success, but over time, you know, we'll be able to see it and have a better understanding of, you know, what we need to do moving forward to make everything better, because we do need law enforcement, but we do need to give them that outside perspective that they probably don't have, and at least, you know, there's opportunities for them to listen.
Absolutely.
For the community to listen as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, you know, Sergeant Cutting is here, and you know, we usually have a sheriff's liaison participating, and you know, I can only imagine that our meetings are not just stopping with Sergeant Cutting. Without a doubt, he's discussing it within the sheriff's office. And again, the open communication is always important. I'm sorry, and I think I've called him Sergeant Cutting a couple times. Lieutenant Cutting. Okay, so I'm going to open it up to public comment. Before I do, I just want to make one announcement. This goes a little bit with our in-reach, and our public is going to be interested in this as well. Windsor Town Council tomorrow, they are part of the Sheriff's Office. Windsor Town Council is continuing its review and discussion on police use of force policies and practices at its regular Town Council meeting tomorrow, October 7th at 6 p.m. The meeting's held by Zoom. All are welcome to attend and give public comment. Please go to the Town of Windsor website for the link for Zoom. And for those of you of the CAC who would like to be a part of that, again, that's part of the Sheriff's Department. So if you can attend, please do. I did want to announce, and let me take a look here. I do apologize for anybody who has been trying to call in to give public comment. The call-in meeting ID that was listed on our agenda, I've been informed was incorrect. If there are people listening who would like to call in to give public comments, not through the Zoom app, but through the telephone, the number that we have on our agenda is correct for the phone number. The meeting ID number is 94130849765. The password is the same that's listed, 247108. I apologize to anybody who may have been trying to call in using the other information and was not able to. We were just informed recently that that was incorrect. We will try to do our best to make sure that doesn't happen in the future. We do apologize for that. I'm now going to open up the public comments. We will limit our public comments to 3 minutes. All are encouraged to engage in respectful communication that supports freedom of speech and values diversity of opinion. CAC members, staff, and the public are encouraged to create an atmosphere of respect and civility where all are free to express their ideas within the content and time parameters established by the Brown Act and our standard parliamentary procedures. Please adhere to the time limits for each speaker. We will allow 3 minutes this evening in order to allow as many people the opportunity to be heard. Please be cordial and respectful during your discussions. Listen with an open mind to all information, including any dissenting points of views. Recognize it is sometimes difficult for people to speak at meetings and give public comment. And out of respect for each person's perspective, please allow them to have their say without comments or body gestures, including booing, whistling, clapping, or anything negative. Please allow people to speak openly and freely. Okay, I will now open up to public comments. I do see we have a hand raised. It's a phone number ending 0694. If you could please identify yourself and please speak when you are able to.
Hi, I'm Jim Duffy. I live in Rohnert Park. I want to congratulate Director Navarro on her skillful first IOLARO annual report. The practice of civilian oversight is a difficult road where you are often under attack from individuals from all sides, and sticking it out and producing a quality report is no small task. So again, congratulations. I would ask for clarification from the Director on the size of the current backlog and confirmation that no potential audit since the founding of the office will ultimately be discarded or left undone or abandoned. I'm very concerned about the elimination from the annual report of the Sheriff's reasons for his refusal to implement certain recommendations. It's a violation of the spirit and intent of the transparency and accountability called for in the creation of the IOLARO office. The CAC Task Force report states the response of law enforcement will be made public in an effort to ensure the community clearly understands the intent and limitations of law enforcement in making changes in protocol. The Sheriff's failure to provide feedback as to why the recommendations will not be enacted and simply stating that they are not adopting the recommendations is unacceptable. In the most recent prior annual report, the Sheriff provided his reasoning for accepting or not accepting items in the annual report, and the Director then expressed an opinion on the Sheriff's reasoning. We need to return to that model regardless of how uncomfortable it may make the Sheriff feel, to actually be transparent in his reasoning and accountable to the community for how he chooses to police us. One of the fruits of the reset of the IOLARO Sheriff's Office relationship is the Sheriff's agreement to explore the creation of community panels to involve community members in the interview process for hiring and promotion of deputies. Community panels were first proposed in the 2015 CAC final report by its Community Policing Subcommittee chaired by Sylvia Lemus. It was again proposed under Director Threed. Both of the previous attempts did not get off the ground. I encourage the CAC to grab onto this opportunity and give and get the Director any support she needs to make the community hiring and promotion panels a reality. Thank you. It's also, just want to throw in real quick, I know I'm at time, it's been in the recent past, the last 5 years or less, that we started contracting out mental health services in the jails. It was, like Alma said, done internally before. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Jim. The next hand I see up is Kathleen. Kathleen, go ahead and when you're here, please give us your public comment. Kathleen, see if you can, see if you can unmute yourself now that you're in. There you go.
Does it work that time?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
thank you.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I want to commend everybody here for all the hard work that's evident on the part of the CAC and the Director. It's very encouraging to see this, and there couldn't be a better time for all of this to come to its potential. I want to, and most enthusiastically, agree with Evan and your assessment of the Blount case, which is absolutely outrageous. I think when he was fired, it was a wink wink. Everybody knew what was going to happen. And there needs to be a law about that stuff. Of course, the unions will not be supportive. Lorena, I appreciate your analysis too, but I think given the lawsuits that the Sheriff and the Deputy Sheriff's Association socked to the Board of Supervisors the instant they put the Measure P on the ballot, I think their sincerity has not yet been proven, to say the least. The August and September meetings were exhilarating. I think they were the robust participation in this critical issue of the Evelyn Cheatham Ordinance was very, very fulfilling and important. And this is really IOLARO and CAC working with the public and fulfilling their potential. It was wonderful to see that, and I really hope that this will continue. This trend will continue, in the future as we address all the important issues that face us. I do have a question about the audits, and I'm trying to keep notes here, and I've got all these little scribbles, and I am not a mathematical person, to say the least. But I was correct me if I'm wrong, because I wouldn't be surprised if I am. I believe that Carlene said she did 24 audits, which came to 2 a month. And yet I think she's been in office for 18 months. So I'm confused by that statement. And what I'm getting is the audits received between January 19th and July 20th count to 40, 24 completed, and that would leave a backlog of 16. But there's no mention of the backlog inherited from the previous regime. And I would also like to point out that all the work that Director Threet did with one assistant, period, was astounding. So it's been a hard road to hoe. I think things are looking better on that score for Iolero. We're getting the money we need. We're going to get the staff we need. We've got subpoena power that we need. It's all very encouraging. But I would like to know about the backlogs, what happened to that 26, and the 16 that apparently remain. So thank you.
Okay, Kathleen, thank you. That's the time. Because this is public comments and we are subject to the Brown Act, we can't really answer questions at this time. But if you'd like to email us, you and Jim Duffy both brought up the issues of backlog. We will see if we can bring that up at another meeting just to address that. And I would note that this annual report did end July 31st, so it does not cover through the end of 2020. The reporting cutoff date was July 31st, where the reporting stops. So, okay, the next hand I see up is Jerry Threet. Jerry, go ahead and give your public comments once they let you into the speaking part of this. There you go. Hi, Jerry.
Good evening. This has been a really excellent discussion, and I also want to say that I believe the last 2 meetings the CAC had also were wonderful meetings, and I commend you all and also the director for pulling those meetings together. They were really excellent. And for this report, I also want to commend the director. I think that the clarity of the reporting on the audit outcomes is really excellent, and many very wonderful policy recommendations were offered, and I think it's a true public service. I wanted to address a few things that came up during the meeting. I just wanted, for some clarity, that the materials in Iolero have always been translated into Spanish. So I just wanted to clarify that because it came up. One thing I wanted to note is that one of the things noted by the director in this report, 2 of the things noted about investigations, the leading questions by internal affairs investigators and the incomplete investigations, those have been persistent issues since Iolero opened. There was a report that was issued in 2018 about deficiencies in internal affairs investigations, and that report noted those things and also made a recommendation that the Sheriff's Office adopt a formal policy to guide how internal affairs investigations were done. I would recommend that folks go back and read that. It shows that this is a persistent issue. And on Deputy Blount, a couple of folks have brought that up. There is actually a process where if a deputy has committed a crime and if the district attorney charges that crime and successfully prosecutes it, state law provides that that deputy's pension will be taken away from them. So there is a law in the books that will address this issue. And I guess we need to wait and see what the district attorney is going to do. We've been waiting for a while and hopefully she'll come out soon. Thank you very much.
Evan, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Threet. I appreciate the public comments.
And Evan, if you don't mind, I can answer Kathleen's questions really quickly.
That would be great if you're able to address the backlog issue, if that is something we can address.
So I just wanted to say, Kathleen, you were wrong. I did not say I did 2 audits per month. I said the audits come in at an average rate of 2 per month. The 26 cases that I inherited in backlog, including 2 officer-involved shootings, are still outstanding. And that was discussed during budget hearings. One of the attorney positions was specifically granted to cover and help Iolero catch up on that backlog. And currently 12 cases remain in the office currently. I've received 24 completed cases and I completed 12, including the critical incident of David Ward, which took about 4.5 months to complete, in addition to all the other stuff I was working on. So 12 remain. And I think that covers it.
Yeah, thank you, Carlene. I do not see anybody else raising their hand for public comment. So at this time, I will adjourn our meeting. Our next, let me just double check here. Our next CAC meeting will be held, I want to make sure we have the right date. We're going to be doing that on Monday, November 2nd at 5:30, I'm sorry, at 6 p.m. 6 p.m. on November 2nd. I look forward to seeing everybody there, and I hope you all have a wonderful evening. Thank you.